Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, and we're specifically going to talk about Doric and Doric's earned humility, right? So let's jump into this. So I am a D&D partisan. I am for D&D. I stand for the cause of D&D. I am dedicated to protecting D&D until I'm no longer here, until I'm in a pine box, right? And it needs protection, right? People came for it to destroy it in 1983. People came for it to destroy it in 2023, both shouting the same banner words, D&D be gone, right? So it's important. We need to in my humble opinion, we need to stand for Dungeons & Dragons and make sure it's safe from the people that want to make it not exist, right? And apparently every generation a new group comes, right? So it's a whole thing. All right. So now, who are the groups that come? Right now, so who are, in my humble opinion, the greatest threat to Dungeons & Dragons right now are OSR partisans. Essentially people who are partisan on the side of OSR. Not all OSR partisans, but I would say a subset of the OSR. So essentially OSR partisans who... So the OSR is a parasite on D&D, right? And these are the OSR partisans that want the parasite to kill the host, right? I think that's the best way to understand it, okay? So it really galls me. Like you'll see, here's a good example. Go over on Ghostfire Games podcast. Just watch James Hake, right? So he talks constantly about Dungeons & Dragons. 100 snide remarks, 100 insults. Like, just has no respect for Dungeons & Dragons. And a lot of his products would not exist, and a significant portion, if not all, of his entire living wouldn't exist if it weren't for Dungeons & Dragons, right? And so he's constantly saying, Dungeons & Dragons books aren't the best. Dungeons & Dragons books aren't good. Dungeons & Dragons, everything in them is mid, right? Just like lots of really snide comments. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he is very unfair to Dungeons & Dragons, right? And what he's saying, and what galls me is he makes tabletop role-playing games, and nothing he's ever created is even remotely as good as, is even a fraction, well, I guess it is a fraction, is even 25% as good as the worst Dungeons & Dragons D&D canon hardback, right? And it doesn't get sales, it doesn't get attention, right? But he has no humility when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons, and we'll talk smack about it, right? Now, I'm talking about James Hake, but there's hundreds. There's over 1,000 people. There's over 1,000 creators that are just like this, just constantly throwing shade at Dungeons & Dragons and have no humility when it comes to it, right? And this galls me because they don't equal D&D in sales. They don't equal D&D in quality. They don't equal D&D in any measure, right? But they feel very free to insult it, right? And there was a part in the movie Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves where there's a life lesson that we can take away from Doric. So let me explain what it is. So, Edgin Darvis, Holga Kilgore, and Simon Almer go to Doric, and they find Doric in the Neverwinter Forest, right? And then they take her to a tavern, which is it's an Emerald Enclave tavern, which is in the trees in the Neverwinter Forest that look out onto Neverwinter itself, right? Actually, no, it doesn't look out on Neverwinter itself. It looks out over the destruction that Forge Fitzwilliams did to the Emerald Enclave's land. Okay, pretty interesting, all right? And so they bring her to a nice tavern, and they buy her drinks and say, listen, we need your help taking down Forge Fitzwilliams, right? And so immediately Doric comes back with this OSR energy, right? And starts insulting this band of adventurers. And she's like, so she's like, well, I already know that Simon sucks. I already know Simon sucks as a sorcerer. Now, first of all, she's already seen Simon cast spells that she can't cast, right? And Simon is not at his full power, but there's no reason for her to be throwing shade at Simon. Now, to tell the truth, Doric does have her powers under control completely, and is incredibly talented, right? But there's just no reason for her to throw the shade and disrespect that she throws to Simon at Simon. It's just wrong, okay? And then she's like, and what do you know? And actually, this is interesting. To Holga, right? She doesn't show any disrespect, right? Which is interesting. Why is that happening? Why does Holga get a pass, right? Kind of interesting. I think I know the answer. I think you might know the answer, right? And it's not fair, right? It's prejudice. The reason that I think there's prejudice involved in why she immediately gives Holga a pass and gives her no and gives her slack, right? But Edgin, she's like, so what do you do again? And Holga's like, and Edgin says, I plan, right? And she goes, well, you've already made the plan. What do we need you for? And he goes, if the plan fails, I make a new plan, right? And she's like, so you make plans that fail, right? And she immediately, she's like, Simon, you suck. And Edgin, you suck. And I'm great. And Holga, nice to meet you, right? Like, and it's just, there's this level of hubris there, right? And so then it looks like it's not going to work, right? And Edgin and Simon and Holga are like, hey, we really need your help to get this done. Can you help us? Excuse me. And so they are also like, there's going to be treasure because we're going to be taking the vault at Neverwinter, right? And so Forge will have this treasure. So if you don't believe in our cause and you don't believe in us, can you at least, consider it for a share of the treasure, right? And this is where it gets interesting, and this is the life lesson, right? And this is pretty beautiful, actually. So Doric then says, she looks out, right? And she looks at the Neverwinter Forest that's been chopped down, right? A huge section of the Neverwinter Forest that has been chopped down by Forge Fitzwilliam's men, right? In order probably just for firewood or to build more buildings in Castle Never, or to ship off, right? Neverwinter's it has a port, right? So it can ship goods out, right? And she looks out and she sees her failure. She sees her failure. She sees her failure, right? She was supposed to stop this. She didn't, right? And you know what she says? She looks out and she sees her failure. And she says, you know what? You guys have a plan to take down Forge Fitzwilliams. But my plans, none of them worked, right? And then this level of humility comes over her, right? And she just admits. And then she says, you know what? I'm gonna join this adventure for you. But I'm not gonna take a shit. I'm not gonna do it for the money. I'm not gonna do it for treasure, right? I was a tiefling born to human parents, and when they abandoned me, the wood elves of Neverwinter Forest took me in, right? And so she says, hey, I'm going to do the right thing here, and I'm going to be humble, and I'm going to admit my plans failed, right? Which means I don't have any reason anymore to say a sharp word against you, and I have to acknowledge my own suck before I can point at your suck, right? Or even accuse you of sucking, right? Which may not be right, which I don't think is right on either Edgin or Simon's part. Doric's hubris was completely unwarranted, and her earned humility because she had failed finally emerges, and she gets on board and she helps. And this is where the OSR fails. They do not have that level of humility, that earned humility. Their junk has failed, right? And before Kelsey Dion is the only OSR creator ever in the history of humanity, right, to ever produce $1 million Kickstarter for the OSR. Their stuff is crusty junk failure compared to Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons has outstripped them in writing, in art, in layout, and consequently as in sales, in cultural impact, in every single metric that matters. The OSR has been dusted and done. They have earned humility, not hubris, right? And Doric looked at her own failures and adopted humility to replace hubris. And that's what the OSR has to do, right? Because it's what's right. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.